I was about 9 when this happened. Me, my mum, and my sister moved into this old house that was made before the Second World War. My great uncle, who was a veteran, told us stories about it when it was in its glory days. Well, everyone in our town said the place was haunted. That just set off signals in my head, especially when I remember driving past the front of the house and seeing a girl in the attic window. I eventually rubbed it off, but I still hated the house. I always felt like I was being watched and never felt alone. I was always uncomfortable, and I just hated it and begged my mom not to move us in. Yeah, that didn't happen. Whether you believe in mediums or not, both of my grandmothers had a hardcore belief that we had medium blood or something stupid like that, but it skipped a generation or something like that. My room was the worst to be in, always freezing, always felt heavy, and always had something weird going on. My sister always hated going past my room to go to the restroom, and I always hated being in my room. When we first moved in, I would knock on the floor and something would knock back. I would grab midnight snacks and see shadow men, women, and children from the corner of my eye. One time, I was even making a sandwich. I saw the shadow woman in the hall, and I just said hi, then made my sandwich. I turned for some reason and saw a shadow man maybe a foot from me. It took a moment before I ran to my room. One time when I was sleeping in the living room, I felt a hand press against my back and heard light footsteps. It felt like a male's hand. My parents are divorced and no one had their boyfriend over. Another time, I had a few pieces of paper on the table in the living room, and I made the joke that the ghost should move it. It took a moment before it shot across the table and just stopped on the edge. I jumped and ran. Another time, I woke up in my room and saw a girl in my doorway, and not like skin tone and hair colour, she was translucent. She was grey with gouged out eyes, with blood going down her face. She had a dress on with a coat. I stayed frozen before I jumped up and moved past her. My sister rubbed it off until her boyfriend stayed in my room while I was at a friend's house. He saw the same exact thing but rubbed it off until he heard my story. But what made this so much weirder is that it's the same girl from the window before we moved in. I have so many more stories about this house, and I hope it falls soon. It was a sad house, and I don't know how else to describe it. I want to preface this by saying I'm not religious. Spiritual, but not religious. I believe in cleansing with sage, incense, crystals, all of that. Pretty common nowadays, I know. I like to think I'm pretty in touch with the unexplained, but this has been taken to another level. So I've had sleep paralysis since I was 15. It's just something I grew used to. Other than the initial shock and fear, it didn't really bother me. When I was 19, I was living with my aunt and I could just feel there was something in the house. But there was one experience that changed my perception entirely. I was working at Ulta at the time. Most of my job was showing customers products and swatches. I normally used to get sleep paralysis when lying on my back, but this specific night before I worked, I had fallen asleep on my stomach and ended up having a really bad episode. And she, my sleep paralysis demon, who was always the same woman, was sitting on my back this time, pinning my wrists down. I could paint the picture of it all, of the details so well. This was by far the most intense skin-crawling episode I ever had. My wrists were throbbing. I thought I could feel her digging her fingers into my skin. I could feel her legs squeezing my ribs and even her hair brushing my back. It was so vivid. I came to, of course there was no one actually in my room, but my skin was crawling. Well, I went into work the next day as usual, went through my normal day. I'd been washing my arms off from all the swatches, and my coworker pointed out this weird brown shade that wasn't coming off. I brushed it off, but when I was showering later, I tried scrubbing it off, and although it didn't hurt, it didn't budge. There were identical bruises on both wrists where she had been holding me the night before. This changed my perception of sleep paralysis entirely. It no longer felt just like bad dreams. It became very real. Moving out of that house, things seemed to halt. I hadn't had sleep paralysis or negative spiritual experiences for about 3 years, until last night. So I moved in with my boyfriend about 2 months ago. The house has never felt bad or negative to me. Me and my now 4-month-old puppy have been doing pretty great. Brutus, the puppy, has had a couple of weird incidents. Barking in an empty dark room, waiting in front of the doors with no one inside, and randomly going nuts. I figured I'd sense anything awry, so I chalked it up to just being a crazy puppy. I saged the house regardless when I moved in. It's just part of my personal anointing process. I light incense pretty regularly, and things have been really good. Until last night. I get home a little after 2:30 in the morning. I wasn't super tired, and my boyfriend and I stayed up for a while talking. I decided I probably needed some sleep, so we went to bed. He fell asleep, holding me in a very specific position. I fell asleep, but it was kind of like a weird half-awake, half-asleep kind of feeling. I was asleep with my eyes closed, though. It was weird, because it felt like I was awake. It was so vivid. In my dream, I was looking at my boyfriend in a different position than I saw last, and right behind him was a woman. Not the same woman I used to see either. Her image shook me to the core. All of the stereotypical sleep paralysis demon features: dark hair, pale skin. The thing that freaked me out the most was its eyes. They were wide open, staring at me from behind my boyfriend's head. I couldn't see her mouth because only the top part of her head was peeking over him, but it looked like she was smiling. It took me a solid 15 seconds to force myself awake. I physically had to pry my eyes open, which is why I don't believe it was sleep paralysis, and I could move as soon as I actually woke up. When I looked and saw that my boyfriend was now in a completely different position, the one he was in my dream, I instantly felt nauseous. This did not feel right at all. As soon as I woke up, I sat up hyperventilating and crying because of how bad this energy felt. My boyfriend just tried to comfort me by telling me it's just a dream and all that, but this was different. This felt demonic. I ended up shaking and crying in the bathroom last night, dry heaving from the image. Her face is burned so deeply in my mind I can't sleep. I'm cleansing the house again today, but something is telling me this is deeper than that. My boyfriend believes in the paranormal and doesn't have a problem with the way I handle things, but he's one of those, if I don't see it, it doesn't bother me kind of people. Ever since I can remember, I've had some scary experiences with things I can't really explain. From things falling off counters to seeing people that weren't there, it became a norm for me and my family to the point of us ignoring things. I believe it was all connected to the house we were living in at the time, because as soon as we moved out, these unexplainable things hit a plateau. But this experience was too stunning to ignore. First, a little bit to know before I start the story. It was a pretty chill night at my house. Everyone was asleep except me, my sister, and my brother's baby. Avery, who was about 10 months at the time. Avery was very attached to my sister, so she often slept with us. Me and my sister shared a room with a bunk bed, and of course, being the youngest, I got the top bunk. This bunk bed was worn and creaky. If someone was moving or doing anything at all, it would make a noise. Anyways, on this night, I was watching TV while my sister went out to do something, leaving Avery sleeping on the bottom bunk. She had been in a deep sleep for about 30 minutes, and usually when she hits the 10-minute mark, we know she's out for the night. To my surprise, my sister came back to the room pretty quickly and sat down very aggressively on the bed, as well as leaving the door open. Her heavy sit caused a loud creak to come from the bed, so loud it made the baby wake up. I heard a quiet shh come from my sister from the bottom bunk. Avery started crying heavily. I've never heard her cry so hard, but I chose to ignore it because my sister was with her and would calm her down. But after 20 minutes of constant crying, I couldn't take it anymore. I wondered what my sister was doing instead of comforting the screaming baby right beside her. I was annoyed beyond belief. Are you serious? I bend my head over to look at the bottom bunk, and all I see is Avery, sitting there, tears rushing down her face, alone. My heart completely dropped. It felt like I couldn't breathe for a second. My body went completely cold, although I was in a well-heated house. My sister then bursts into the room, screaming at me for not doing anything about the crying baby. I was absolutely stunned. I saw my sister come in. I heard her sit down, and the door was still wide open from when she first came in. She asked me why I wasn't doing anything, and I simply replied, "I thought you were in here." To this day, she says that I was the palest she'd ever seen me. Neither of us can explain who or what I saw, or what I was trying to do to the baby. Over this summer of 2021, I was visited by an angel named Tibri. I know how this sounds, but I need to document this on the web in case anybody else ever comes across a similar situation. I was driving to meet up with my friend and go and have as much fun as you could in New York during peak COVID restriction times. I was depressed, driving and listening to all my favourite sad songs on my way to hang out with my friend. I park up around the corner of his house and just start crying, thinking about my future with school and my business that I'm launching this year. I lit up a cigarette, and a few seconds later I was begging God for an answer and crying about my future. Out of the corner of my left eye, a random guy who looks like a Greek god with golden blonde / straight / dread like hair, think Zeus, appears next to my car on the sidewalk, one way. He had a golden aura surrounding him as if he was going Super Saiyan from Dragon Ball Z, but very light. I could not tell you for $2 billion whether he was white or Mediterranean, or what, but he looked like an actual representation of what churches make gods look like in their art, even down to the halo part around the whole head. He walks up to me on some very casual New York shit, Queens. As I'm crying, he asks, "Angel, I got bud if you need." Me, "Nah, bro, I'm good, I appreciate you." He starts walking away and comes back once more asking, "You sure, bro? Take my number down. I'm always around here." For some reason I respond, "You know what? Yeah, man, you seem cool. I've just been going through a lot." He goes, "You shouldn't be sad. Everything's going to be okay. You got this." I got goosebumps. I ask the angel for his name, and he's giving me his number, and he says Tibri. I texted the number saying, "Nice to meet you, bro." And he walks away and responds exactly 3 seconds later, "You too, my brother. I'll see you soon." And walks to the corner of the block, less than 15 yards. An immense light just shines down this one-way street and he disappears. I turn my car on, drive to the intersection, and there's only 3 places he could have gone. Straight, left, or right. He went neither. He vanished. In less than 10 seconds, this man was gone, and he walked to the corner. His phone number no longer works. Goes straight to, "We're sorry, this number has." Some of you may laugh, but I feel like if an angel were to ever approach you and send you a message, what's the best way you think they could do that won't make it too obvious? For me, being raised in New York, you always got someone trying to sell you weed and take their number down, so I'm used to it. So instead of an angel coming down with its wings out and an obvious halo, what if they just pop out as a regular customer at your job? Or just someone you let cross the street, even when you have the green light? Or that homeless person who truly wants something to eat? What if that's why we are told to love each other equally? Because you never know who you could be really talking to. For all we know, this reality is all a test, and you need to pass the test by shedding kindness onto every soul you meet. If I caught my angel slipping, just know, Tribby, I'm going to make fun of you for eternity. This happened about 11 years ago when I was a child. Don't really remember the exact age, but I remember it was during the summer holidays. I live in Central Europe, and my father comes from a village in a neighbouring country. The village has a population of about 1,000, so basically the whole village knows each other. And the village is a little bit, well, weird. It doesn't really have much to do with people. They're all really nice and like to see our family when we came there every summer holidays for 2 weeks. We didn't really go there for about 4 years because father and uncle had a big fight about grandmother's heritage after she died. But I plan on going there alone once this whole COVID thing is over. So I guess I'll start with the stories. First, the village and the house of my grandmother, where I also have my own experiences. So the first story is one that was around the village when my dad was little. Once, there was a church celebration / mass, or what is it called? And it was about this one man. I don't really know much about churches, but this one has that tiny balcony where you can observe things from above, and it has some extra seats. He went there because it was the last place with empty seats. He sat on one in the corner, but had fallen asleep. He woke up some time later, and the church thing was still going, but something felt off. Apparently, after some time, he realised that the people there were already dead and buried behind the church, and everything was silent. He was scared, so he tried to open the front door, which was unfortunately locked. By the way, the spirits were staring at him this whole time. After some time, he had an idea to go up and wake up the village using the church bell. It worked, and the village gathered and unlocked the door, so he got out. The ghosts are not there anymore, and his hair went grey from all the fear. I heard other stories, but I don't remember all of them, so if people who read this want, I can ask my father about other stories. So now to my dad's experiences. It's nothing special, but I'm just surprised at how many of them there are. First, when he was a teen. There was a celebration, and he and his friend were messing around on the edge of the forest. At one point, they both saw the light deep in the forest. They tried to investigate. My father is really brave about these things. So they took a bucket of water in case of fire and went up. When they arrived, no light was to be seen. It was just pitch black like it tends to be in the forest. So they looked around for a bit and then went back. After some time, they again looked up the hill and saw the light again, but this time they were too scared to go there. So they kind of forgot about it, and the light disappeared after some time. Then, when he was older and was in high school, this one is probably the creepiest and always seemed too fake to me. So I later thought it was just some bedtime story my dad made up. I joked about it a few years back, however, and my dad started to shout at me and was really angry with me for some time afterwards. That made me believe he was telling the truth, because he seemed genuinely angry that I was making fun of it. So he was in high school in a nearby city, and would always arrive home pretty late. This one evening was in winter, and it was around 11 p.m. From the bus stop you have to take quite a long road to the house. Then it's just a few more houses and then the forest. So he was walking towards his house. A few hundred meters away there's a turn, so you cannot see very well what's further down the road. But then there arrived an old lady, and she was coming right towards him. He already knew something was off, because what would an old grandma be doing outside at this time? She was pretty normally dressed. She had a skirt and a headscarf. But after they got closer, he noticed something. She was normally dressed, but instead of a face, there was nothing. Just a black hole. He was obviously really scared, but continued to walk towards her. They crossed each other, but she didn't seem to be aware of his presence. So she kept walking towards the village, and my dad ran home and went to sleep. Those are the two that I remember. There are, of course, a few more. And now to the house stories. So first, my dad when he was already an adult and slept there for a few nights. His grandmother used to live with them when he was little. He had a room on the second floor and his bed was facing the door. Every morning, his grandma would look through the glass that was on the door to see if he was awake, and then she opened the door. So now he's an adult and is sleeping in the same position as when he was little. It was close to midnight, and he was looking at the locked door. At one point he asked himself, what would you do if the doors opened right now? And just a few seconds later, the doors would creak and open. He was staring at them for a few minutes, waiting for something to happen. Then he got up and locked them again and went to sleep. The second one is from my uncle when he was about 11 years old and home alone at night. The stairs to the second floor always creak incredibly loudly. He was about to go to sleep when the stairs started to creak, as if someone was walking on them. He was scared, but managed to put the blankets over his head and fall asleep. And now to me and my twin sister. We recently talked about this, and I told my sister I always felt weird and scared on the second floor. And when I had to go up there, I would go super quickly, and then sprint back down. I was surprised she told me that she felt the same. First, her story. Me and my dad were sleeping in a tent in a garden. We were about 9 years old. My grandma and mom were sleeping downstairs, and she was sleeping on the second floor. She told me that she heard the door open and someone was walking around the room. Then she suddenly felt cold, like someone was hugging her. This lasted for about a minute. Then it stopped and the door closed again. And finally my story. It's pretty similar to my uncle's. I was quite addicted to video games when I was about 10 years old. So once, there was some kind of celebration and everyone from the house went there except for me, because I wanted to play. So it was around 5 p.m, and I was playing downstairs in the living room when suddenly I heard the stairs creak incredibly loud, like someone was stomping on it. I waited for nothing and bailed from there to the garden, where I spent the next 2 hours before everyone got back, and I grew even more scared at the second floor in the stairs. My family went camping over the weekend, down in the Wyoming/Yellowstone area. It was my immediate family and my cousins. One night during that stay, it began to rain, and my cousin and I decided we didn't really want to get soaked in a tent. So we moved into my mom's red Suburban and put the seats down and just stayed up and talked. I'm not entirely sure what time it was, given I didn't have a clock, but I'm assuming sometime around 2:30 or 3. We were talking for quite some time, to the point that even the forest was quiet. I sat up and looked out the back window of the vehicle and stared deep into some trees. Before anything bad happens, I always get a feeling beforehand. I remember staring down this line of trees and just getting an overwhelmingly bad feeling. Anyways, that feeling had caused me to just lay back down and continue talking to my cousin. I really didn't have the time or energy to see anything that night, because I knew if I kept staring in that direction, I would have seen whatever it was. As I was laying next to my cousin, a blue orb swiftly passed around the car we were in. It was about the size of a basketball, maybe bigger. It was incredibly fast, so fast it shook the car. I jumped due to it surprising me, and I quickly grabbed onto my cousin and asked him, "Did you see that?" He gets a little startled from my sudden grab of his arm, and he just says he didn't see anything. I brush it off and assume it's just my lack of sleep messing with me. Anyways, fast forward about 2 minutes, a massive light blue glowing orb starts to surround the vehicle we're in. It's making a noise that I will never forget. It's sort of like when a car at high speed passes you. It gets loud, then quiet, then loud again. The whole car was shaking as these orbs continued circling this car at this insanely high speed. This time, he's experiencing it too, and I'm clenching his arm so hard and screaming while he's screaming with me. This happens for about what feels like forever, but in reality was probably just a matter of seconds, maybe 10. After the orbs vanished, we kept holding on to each other for a couple minutes while shaking. Neither of us wanted to open our eyes. He says he saw something different than orbs. He described it as a tesseract triangles absorbing into each other, like a dolphin swimming through water. He described them as light blue and glowing, just as I did. My family is pretty abnormal, I'd say. Either that or gifted. We see lots of things that people would probably call us schizophrenic or crazy for. Hence, why I don't share these things with people outside of my family or inner circle. And normally, when I do have other people with me, they can see these things too. My mother and stepdad had recently finished building their house when I was about 9 or 10 years old. It was kind of in the middle of nowhere and actually right next to a prison as well as a military facility. My brothers and I all got to pick our new rooms, and I chose the room with the windows facing the front of the house. Since the house was brand new, we hadn't had the blinds installed yet. Really, the only furniture the house consisted of was our beds and a couch in the living room. Before I experience these abnormal or paranormal things, I always get chills down my spine. I can sense it before it happens, and it's as if the hairs on my neck perch up, and I can feel the direction energy is coming from. I believe it was the first night of our stay there. I had my bed right next to the window. I was struggling to fall asleep, so I just stared outside at this single street lamp right next to our driveway. I instantly felt sick, nauseous, and just overall icky. Something was going to happen, and I was sensing it, and I just couldn't look away. I have a bad habit of just staring directly into the direction that energy is located. As I was staring, I saw this large humanistic creature thing. It was terribly skinny and freakishly tall. My heart just stopped. I've seen many freaky things before, but not like this. It's so tall, just slightly shorter than the street lamp, with long skinny arms that drag behind it as it slowly limps across. God, I was so frightened that I was frozen. I probably was holding my breath from the fear that just capsulated me. As I see it limp across my yard, it crosses that street lamp. It illuminates all of its features, and it's just disgusting and horrifying. It has no hair, it's fleshy, it's tall and skinny. Its features and its face are sunken in, yet it has no eyes, or lips, or any of that. Its legs are slightly bent as its arms drag behind. It's so vivid in my memory even now. I remember every detail, and I'm 18 years old. Anyways, I just stare at it in complete fear as it crosses slowly, and after it passes the light, it just vanishes. I ran into my older brother's room after that and just slept on his floor. Let's just say, I basically stayed up the whole night making sure whatever that was didn't come in. The energy just located in that area in general was terrible. I never left that house at night alone unless something was watching me. Does anybody know what that creature could have been? I've got many other stories to share. My family is pretty cursed with seeing these sorts of things. The roof was technically not the exclusive use of our kindergarten, as it was shared between our building and the next, and their penthouse also had access to said roof. But the family that owned the contiguous apartment had an agreement with Baba to let them use it. Said family also happened to have a daughter, who we were told was sick. But once she would make full recovery, she would join Baba and be able to study while play with us. This girl, by the way, is the protagonist of this story. After noticing her looking at us from inside her home, and having taken as much of a liking to her as a little kid of that age can, I asked her to come play with us, to which she replied she was not allowed to, as her parents told her that it could make her more sick. However, after a few days talking from her window, we found a way to cheat the system. She would leave the door of her house open and would throw a ball at me, which I would throw at her in turn while we talked, which her parents thought was cute, and so did our caretakers. So much so that they told my parents, who wasted no time to tease me and claim that I had a girlfriend, which embarrassed and angered me, and would tease me almost daily, whenever they would fetch me and would find me playing with her. This detail would be important later. After a few months, however, the girl stopped showing up. I was told by one of our carers that her health had gotten worse, and thus she could no longer play with me, and I never saw her again. While I was very upset about it initially, my parents and I moved away during that summer, and soon I was too busy making new friends in my new school to remember about her, as kids are wont to do. 10 years passed, until one day, after I told my mother that I had gotten my first girlfriend, she decided to tease me and claim she was the second, as the girl in the kindergarten came first. This tease made all the memories of that girl come rushing back, and after a few weeks of not being able to take it off my head, I decided to return to where Baba used to be, and with some luck, find the girl and see if she would remember to me. Luckily for me, the family still lived in the house, and after I introduced myself and told them a very abridged version of the story through the speaker, they invited me to come up and talk. The father explained to me that sadly, the girl had passed away all those years back, but not to worry, as rather than inconvenience them, it made them happy to meet someone else who remembered their daughter after all those years, although he did say he didn't remember her ever playing with me. He did, however, confirm that they didn't let her come out to play with the kids from Babar, as her health was very bad, and they feared it may got worse if she runned around. Her mother, however, seemed somewhat bothered, and she mostly just stared at me silently. And once her father began showing me pictures of the girl that they still conserved, which by the way was indeed the girl I remembered, she suddenly asked me how old I was, to which I replied that I was indeed 16. And this is where the story turns weird. The second I mentioned my age, both her and the father were visibly shaken and disturbed, and the father quickly asked me to confirm my birth year, which is 1986. After looking at each other and then at me with bewilderment, the mother, which as I mentioned had been mostly quiet, began telling me, visibly upset, that it was impossible that I had met their daughter because their daughter had passed away in 1986. That made no sense, because my mother remembered her just as much as I did, and I do remember our carer mentioning that she was ill and could no longer play with us. So that's 2 adults and myself that remembered her. Yet her parents insisted that she passed away in 1986, and her father even borderline angrily threatened with showing me her death certificate. Things got very tense, and I felt extremely uncomfortable, and so did the family. So I excused myself, which they did make no effort to stop, and left, never to return for another 10 years. By the time I was nearly 26, I decided to return to the house once more, despite feeling extremely uncomfortable about it, because as silly as it sounds, I could almost not believe my own experience, and I wanted to find out the truth. But by then, the apartment belonged to someone else. I'm now nearly 36, and I still cannot forget this story, which keeps coming back, usually after I have a dream about it at random, every couple of years. When I was around 14 or so, I had 2 friends very interested in magic, Wicca, and the supernatural. I'll call them Abby and Brittany. One day, Brittany wanted to try something she had read about, a massage that was supposed to open up the senses or something and be a spiritual type release. This massage was supposed to only be done with 2 people in the room, but we were young teens and didn't care. We decided to try it in Abby's room, in what was basically an attic. Brittany would massage Abby first. We turned off all the lights so it was pitch black, and Brittany started on Abby's shoulders. I was sitting on the floor, unable to see anything, and that's when it happened. I began to feel weak and lightheaded, like I was about to pass out. I took a deep breath and was suddenly no longer in Abby's room. I had been transported somewhere else entirely. A bright blue sky, no clouds and no sun, expanded above me. Flat, beige rock was as far as I could see. From the rock, people were growing, almost entirely made of beige rock. Some were formed more than others, some were just tall blobs. It was like the blobs were being shaped by an unfelt wind. I walked along in the eerie quiet surrounded by these people until I came to a rock woman in the middle of my path. She was older, her hair in a bun with glasses on her face, and her arms had not been formed yet. I was just standing there looking at her when just as suddenly as I had arrived, I was back in Abby's room. Abby was crying and Brittany quickly turned on the lights. She told us that she'd seen a dark place with reds and blacks. It had scared her badly. I didn't tell them what I saw. I had thought that was that. We never spoke of it again. A couple of years later, Abby and I were at the mall. I had to use the restroom, so I went and did my business and walked out the store to the sinks. And that's when a woman approached me. She held out her hands, they were wet from washing, and said in what I'm thinking was Italian, "Scusi." She was dressed in beige from her glasses to her high heels, with her greying hair in a bun. I was shocked, but showed her how to use the airdryer for her hands. She said grazie. We smiled at each other and I walked out. I never saw her in real life again, but a few years after our encounter, I had a dream. The beige woman was laying in a canopy bed, surrounded by thick purple and red blankets and her family. A window could be seen looking over a beige city with a bright blue sky. It was clear she was on her deathbed. She told me something, and I wish I could remember what it was, and then she peacefully passed. That's when I woke up sobbing. For years, when I would think about her, I would tear up, and would feel like I was having an adrenaline rush. When I finally was able to tell others about this, I couldn't speak about without crying. I often wonder about the beige place with the bright blue sky. Was it creation? The Matrix? The place where we're all connected? Why her? Had I not seen her before, wouldn't that be a completely insignificant encounter? And of course, what does all this mean? I was 14, so maybe my memory is foggy, but I swear to God it's real. Spirits and ghosts were always a joke to me, until this moment when I legitimately felt like something happened. So 3 or 4 years ago, when I was around 13 or 14, I was with my close friend at the time. Me and him always hung out, and I would stay the night and all that jazz, as one would do as a 13-year-old. I trusted him. His house was kind of a big backyard, where we would always play soccer. Now, if you're standing flush to his house, looking at his backyard, there's a normal wood fence straight ahead, and a normal one to the right. To the left, there was only a 2 cinder block high little wall. He would always tell me that he saw big black figures and shit in his neighbour's house windows and yard and porch. Meanwhile, might I add that nobody lived there at the time. I would always write it off as him just jokingly saying these things to mess with me. He would always describe them as these 8-foot tall black masses, just pitch black things standing there or existing there, and when he would look away, it would go away or move closer. Keep this in mind. So, me and him are in the backyard, messing around, playing soccer, kicking the ball, eating whatever you do at 13. We have our goal set up with shoes instead of the cinder block wall. Dumb as hell. I shoot a couple, they bounce off and come back. When I hit one and it goes over the wall, into the neighbouring house's yard, and rolls to the furthest corner of the yard. Of course, my friend being him said, "You kicked it, go get it." Willingly, I jump over the little wall and head to the ball. As I walk over, yes, walk, I don't know what I was thinking, I feel the only way I can describe my stomach dropping like a roller coaster. I turn my head towards the neighbour's house, and standing against the wall is this massive, at least 8.5-foot black mass. Just there, existing. I froze, ball in front of me, and all I could do was stare. I felt like it was holding me mentally. I wasn't focused on anything but its entire body. I heard my friend tell me to hurry up, and I finally snapped. I grabbed the ball and I looked away for half a second, and when I looked back it was gone. But I said fuck that, and I grabbed the ball and ran as fast as I could back over. I went inside and got a drink and just didn't mention it. The next morning I asked my friend and he said, "Yeah bro, I say that all the time. It never does anything. It's just kind of there." Just to start off, yeah, I believe in the paranormal and all that. I also practice craft stuff, so it's fairly well a part of my life. Not to mention that I've dealt with more than my share. As of recently, I moved states to live with my family in an attempt to disconnect from the other side of my family, and to basically start a new page in my book. The house I moved into has been in the family for over 40 years, and a few years back my great-grandmother passed. It was sad, and I missed her very much. However, I'm still unsettled about seeing her trying to get into her old room. Now my room. She hates doors, and I had to put one up for privacy deals. While I was rearranging and taking some old things out of my room, I moved a brass photo frame thing that holds the Last Supper, the one with Jesus and his crew. Not Christian, please remember. No disrespect to those that are. I had sat on the floor to be hung up elsewhere in my room. I think it looks cool, and like Da Vinci. It was chilling while I was putting books on a shelf and whatnot around my room when I heard loud thumping from the living room. That would be an issue if there was someone else in the house, even my cats, but it was just me. I firmly believe that was my great-grandma telling me to put it back up. I did. 2 to 3 months after I moved in, her husband, my great-grandpa, passed also. They both still kind of roam the halls here and make sure things are still in check, which is fine and all. I'm just still getting used to seeing them so often. This isn't just the only few things that happen here though. The past 3-ish months there's been a figure that wasn't invited into the house that seems to try and spook me and my boyfriend as much as possible, going as far as scratching me a few times. There hasn't been a night since my boyfriend moved in with me that we've gotten a full night of sleep because of this thing. I know it upsets the great-grandparents to a degree, as well as really goofs with the energy of the rest of the house. I've tried cleansing, removing, even going to someone with way more experience than me for advice. So it's 2 a.m. I'm very tired right now, procrastinating going to sleep, so apologies if this is incoherent. I've never told anyone this story before because they'd probably think I'm crazy. I myself am atheist, though this memory sure raises some doubts. I've decided to believe it was hallucinations caused by anxiety, since at the time I had terrible social anxiety, along with generalized anxiety disorder. It was also during the same year my depression came on suddenly and hard. My parents divorced, my mom moved into an apartment, and I spent every other weekend at the old house with my dad. Now, this was in 8th grade, and I remember middle school was when the vast majority of my nightmares were about demons and ghosts, so that would also have raised my anxiety surrounding that. So, probably the easiest thing to dismiss was one weekend, I saw a tall, dark shadow moving out of the corner of my eye. Another time, as I was getting into bed, I saw a bald white man walk toward the wall, only for a split second. Those are whatever. People see things out of the corner of their eye all the time. Whenever my dad was out of the house and I was sitting in the bedroom upstairs, I would constantly hear footsteps downstairs. If I went downstairs to look, nothing would be there and the sound would stop. I'd go back up and into the bedroom and I would hear it again. You know the cracking sound of settling? I would hear it relatively frequently at night. Okay, so now I'll describe the big night that absolutely terrified me. My dad was out of the house and I was in bed upstairs trying to sleep. I heard that cracking sound non-stop, every few seconds. Then I started hearing the very distinct click of the plastic cap of the string on the curtains hitting against the wall. It was very regular, like it was tapping the wall once per second. At that point, I was getting very anxious, and I put on my headphones and started listening to music to calm down. At the time, I used Tumblr, so I was scrolling through that. Suddenly, a chill went down my spine, and I got a very strong feeling that I was being watched. I think this was because I subconsciously heard the garage door open, because my dad did come in the room a few minutes later, but I'll get to that. Anyways, chills down my spine, feeling of being watched. Soon after that, I started hearing people talking through my music. I couldn't make out any words. It was just a man's voice, just sort of talking normally. First, I closed Tumblr in case there was an ad or something on there, but it didn't stop. Then I closed the music app. It still didn't stop. A second or so after I stopped the music, the voice turned deep and angry and honestly demonic and was yelling. At that point, I ripped my headphones off, ducked under the blankets, and started hyperventilating. Maybe a minute later, my dad ran in the room asking what's wrong. I just told him I didn't hear the garage door open and thought someone broke in the house. I didn't want to say I was hearing voices. Something like that has never happened to me since. A month or two later, my dad moved into an apartment, and I never had to go back to that house again, thank God. Although in one bedroom in my mom's apartment, if I'm in it at night, I would constantly hear footsteps from the kitchen downstairs. But nothing extreme ever happened, like in the original house. And now she's moved out of that and bought her own condo, so I'm completely free of haunting paranoia. I'm just sharing this because I'm curious what someone who believes in hauntings has to say about my story. Oh, and another experience that I can't explain. In 6th grade, I heard the future. Though it's actually a pretty boring story. I had a male bus driver in the morning and a female bus driver in the afternoon. One morning I was on the bus and suddenly heard my afternoon female bus driver yell, "Hey!" I looked around, but no one had reacted to it. And I double-checked the driver. It was definitely the male one. That afternoon, I was on the bus home with the female driver. At one point, a girl on the bus screamed, and the bus driver yelled, "Hey!" And it was exactly the same as the yell I had heard that morning. First off, I've never really had anything paranormal happen to me in all my relatively short life, 25 years. Being a scientist, it never really made much sense to believe in something that can't be proven. However, that all changed one night. About 4 years ago, I was attending a college in southern Arkansas for my bachelor's in biology. My then girlfriend and I didn't have much money, so we shared an on-campus apartment, so our scholarships would cover the rent. This complex was on the outskirts of campus, right next to a rather large pine forest that some people went to smoke, but you could always hear them. In between the forest and our apartment was a dirt parking lot. Our apartment sat on the first floor of the complex, on the side closest to the tree line. We came back to the apartment after grocery shopping one night. After bringing all the groceries in, I decided to sit out on the patio, looking at the forest and the night sky. It was a nice spring Arkansas night with not a cloud in the sky, so this didn't surprise my girlfriend. She went inside and I sat down. As I'm listening to the whippoorwills, I notice a green light coming from just behind the tree line. It was blinking relatively slow and looked as if it was around someone's neck and that thing was digging. Not digging with a shovel, but more animalistic, like a wild boar digging for grubs. It was making no sound and seemed to be minding its own. As I'm watching this thing very intently, a car pulls into the dirt parking lot, briefly flashing its headlights over the light. At this point, the light stood up, turned solid red, and darted in a straight line through the trees, away from the car. Not like a deer running through the trees, mind you, but straight, without moving. I estimated that it would probably moved about 40 to 45 miles an hour. Needless to say, I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I got up early and went to investigate where the light was. There was a small opening next to a creek where I estimated the light was coming from. However, there were no signs of digging or tracks of any kind. I walked in the direction the light fled to. The clearing quickly went back to being a thick understory made up of lots of scrub oak, greenbrier, and limbs. I could barely walk through without getting cut up, and I certainly couldn't walk a straight line. I do not know what I saw that night. I've certainly never heard of anything like this, and I've never seen that light again. I talked to some of my wildlife management friends to see if they had tagged some animals with an LED collar or tag, and they looked at me like I was crazy. Doing so would make no sense and would reduce the survival of the animal, so what was it? An ET? A lost spirit? A person? Or an animal? I guess I won't ever really know for certain. Since then, I've seen many other paranormal things. I've stayed in cabins where the chairs moved by themselves. I've witnessed green orbs from the sky crashing to the earth. I've witnessed spirits vocalize and speak out about possessions my friends have taken from them. It all started after seeing that light. My question now is, why? What was that light? Why did it start this paranormal chain of events? There was a family of 4 that moved into our neighborhood. I couldn't figure out where they were originally from, but they looked like Asian and Hispanic at the same time. They're very good-looking people. I can't explain, but you can say they're very attractive. I've not seen them go out or talk with other people, and I think it's odd that they go out all together almost every night. The 2 members look like a couple, and the other 2 look like a mother and her teenage kid. I wasn't quite sure if the teenage kid was a boy or a girl, because they look very attractive in a way I couldn't explain. They have short, silk black hair, but not very short with pitch black eyes, and a sad body posture, like in a weak demeanour. At that time, I thought they were a bit weird. It was night, and I was practicing and running around the block, preparing for some school competition. On my way home, I saw a weird kid sitting in their front yard, and they were holding a water bottle. I said hi, and they just nodded, so I didn't try to make conversation, and I headed home. I never really talked to my family, but they stayed in our city for at least 5 years. Not quite sure. Then I heard from my parents that this family is moving to a different country due to their jobs. I didn't ask my parents a lot about them, because I guess I was too busy with teenage stuff before, but looking back, I wished I'd asked about them more. So, fast forward to this day. I moved to this country. I'm not going to disclose this for my anonymity, but I saw the kids sitting alone at my local coffee shop. Again, I'm a rational and logical guy, but when I saw them again, I got chills all over my body. Same posture, still very good looking, and still young but dressed maturely. I don't know if they remembered me, but I look older now. I don't know. Maybe this story doesn't mean anything. Maybe I'm just paranoid. But I did ask my parents about the family, and they don't remember them, so I guess this is a dead-end story. When I was in my 20s, I used to live in this apartment on the edge of the city. I used to walk around to explore, because if you went down to the main road, there was a long stretch where there wasn't really much except woods, fields, etc. If you kept going, though, it would become another subdivision. I should say that many weird things happened to me and my friends in this area when I lived there. I'm pretty sure it was built on burial grounds or something. Anyways, one day I was walking down the side of the road away from the city, and I saw a sign at the end of a little gravel road that said Antique Shop. I don't remember the name of the shop, but it's irrelevant. Anyways, I remember that I had been looking for a specific item, so I decided to walk to the shop to see if they had it. As I walked down the gravel driveway, there stood what looked like an old log cabin, but it was the antique shop. A little behind and to the left of the shop, about 50 feet away or so, stood a house. The house was inhabited by the woman who owned the shop, which I found out later. I walked into the shop, and it looked very old and rustic inside. I was the only one in there, except behind the counter, an older woman with grey hair. She immediately started talking to me and was very friendly and welcoming. Felt like I'd known her forever. We chatted for a while, and I remember asking her if they had the item I was looking for. She said no. We talked for a while. I felt like I lost track of time, like we were in our own little world. After chatting with her for a few minutes, she told me I could go up to the house and ask the shop owner if she knew if they had the item. I walked up to the house and knocked on the door. A different older woman answered, and I asked her about the item. I told her that the woman in the shop had told me to come up to the house and ask. She immediately got really wide eyes and had a look of fear came over her. She explained to me that no one else worked in the shop except her. I guess she was taking a break from running the shop and relaxing in the house. Still looking scared and shocked, she quickly tried to shoo me away and told me goodbye and closed the door quickly. I just walked away, not knowing what had just happened. It still gives me chills thinking about it. Who was the woman I had talked to in the shop? Several years ago, I had an opportunity to help restore a 100-plus-year-old church that's been vacant for roughly 45 years or so. The church is attached to what once was a primary school that had already been restored into office spaces. This was a no-brainer, since it was literally a couple blocks away from my house, under the table, and the responsibilities were incredibly easy. Since the church had been empty for years, we only worked during the day, since the electrical system had yet to be installed. But during the days I would work, I'd always see movements in my peripheral vision, but nothing was there when I'd look in that direction. This happened a lot, to the point where I've become accustomed to it. This all changed a few months later when the building became operational, as we converted the church to an event hall designed for any event you'd pay for. Well, after business hours one evening, I got a call from a tenant saying that something was making noise in the basement of the church. Since the power hadn't been installed into the basement at this point, I made sure to grab my brand new charged flashlight and keys to see what was happening. As soon as I got to the basement door, I could hear what sounded like a power tool running. I go in and start making my way through a pitch-black labyrinth of a basement towards the noise. I found the cause of the noise was an air compressor. I know they bleed air at times, but I made sure I bled all the air before I left earlier that day and unplugged it. I looked to see if someone plugged it in after me, and it's still unplugged. At this moment, my brand new flashlight started to flicker, and another unplugged power took turns on behind me. When I turned around to shine my fainting light on it, the light went out completely. I haul ass out of the basement, through complete darkness towards the door. I get out and see the tenant is standing at the door, with a puzzled look on her face. She asks what was wrong, as I'm out of breath and freaked out. I tell her what happened and she smirks and says that doesn't surprise her. She's lived in the neighbourhood her entire life and tells me that as a child she attended the school and church. She then tells me a story of a woman who held the last wedding in the church before it closed down. It was a sad story because the woman was stood up on her wedding day and ultimately committed suicide because of it. After that night in the basement, the paranormal activity happened more and more often. It got to the point where a co-worker fell off a ladder. This ladder was always secured, and he'd been up and down it 100 times. When I asked what happened, he said it felt like he was pushed while leading to paint. There were even times where the movement I had always seen in there started to take shape. Instead of a blur, I started to see a person standing there, but nothing when I looked in that direction. What finally pushed me over the edge was the night I guess you can say I met her. Since events were always held there, I'd always lock up afterwards. After an overnight booking, I ran into the guests as they were leaving. A gentleman asked me if there were any other people in the building that night. I said no, as we make sure the office part of the building is vacant during overnight bookings. He proceeded to tell me he heard yelling from the basement and footsteps on the balcony. I assured him they were the only ones and began to lock up the building. As I'm locking the doors, I hear faintly what the gentleman was referencing. I could hear footsteps on the balcony, and I yelled out, "Is anyone still in here?" I didn't get an answer, but at this point, I'm ready to go. What I hated most about locking up is the light switch was nowhere near the door. She'd have to shut off the lights and then walk about 30 feet to the door in darkness. I shut off the light and immediately sprinted towards the door. As I reached for the door, I hear footsteps behind me and a muffled voice say, "Leave." I didn't stop to see what it was. I made my way to the glass entry doors and to the other side as fast as I could. As I'm locking the door, I see movement inside of the church. I look up and see a ghostly or shadow-like figure standing where the altar once was. I quickly looked down to ensure I locked the door, and by the time I looked back up, the shadowy figure was now making its way to the glass doors. I honestly don't remember if I locked the door or not, because I immediately got the hell out of there at that point. After that night, I made sure I never entered that building after dark again. Summer before last, my boyfriend and I took a road trip to Omaha, Nebraska, with the main purpose of visiting the Museum of Shadows. We're both somewhere between believer and skeptic, and thought it would be a great experience for us. Leaning in, he even paid the $20 to rent a spirit box to use as we walked around the museum. If you haven't visited the Museum of Shadows, I'd recommend it, even if only because I found it very cathartic. It's mostly dolls with tragic stories attached to them, but walking around reading all the stories of suffering and sadness, families associated with many of these items, was very heart-opening, for lack of a better way to word it. Some items I felt were just creepy, and that's where people associated haunting coming when people own them. I believe sometimes people create their own hauntings by just being afraid of an object. Same with the dolls owned by children who had passed. The families are just so saddened and grieve so hard, they begin to assign their child's spirit to those items. It's so sad, but really made me feel a great connection to people I didn't even know, which I think is great for the spirit, however sad. So our spirit box was not giving us anything, literally not a single intelligible word. We were not angry or disappointed. It was sort of a neat if we hear something, but understandable if we don't sort of thing, because we sort of assumed a majority of items in there couldn't be haunted. They've got this doll, Demas, and when I say my heart rate increased just typing her name, I'm not lying. And she lives in a chicken wire cage toward the back of the first floor of the museum. She's scary looking, not a normal looking doll. I got uneasy when I just saw her, and this isn't a building of frightening dolls. Maybe that's intentional though. Maybe they put her in the cage to raise your apprehension. There's a sign above her that says if you choose to speak to her, always say goodbye, which of course you should do with any spirit, but Demas is apparently particularly malicious. I'm a pretty bold soul, so as we're standing there together with the spirit box, I decided I wanted to talk with her. "Hello, Demas," I said, and the spirit box just kept clicking. I didn't know what to talk to her about, but I'm always worried about lost spirits, so I decided to ask, "Are you okay?" And without hesitation, the spirit box said, Amanda, extremely clearly. My boyfriend and I both heard it. I said, did it just... And he was like, yes, absolutely. It said your name. I said above that I'm brave, but I was immediately filled with a sense of dread. Something about it saying my name and that we'd gotten absolutely nothing else with that box the whole time was terrifying, and I do not scare easily. I didn't continue the conversation, I just said, goodbye, Demas, and ushered my boyfriend away from her, because I was so uncomfortable with her following that. Just now, I went through their Facebook feed to see if I still felt the same about her, and saw an event where they let people hold her. I've never felt so appalled seeing such innocent-seeming photographs. That doll is the only item I've ever encountered that I'm sure is 100% haunted, and maybe even malicious.